Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 26th of May 2024. It's a military aid and equipment video. We're going to start with what's potentially some good news, although, no, we're going to start with bad news and then go on to the good news straight away. So, Matteo Salvini, good friend of Vladimir Putin, by point of fact, as leader of the La Liga party in Italy and coalition government member. In fact, is he deputy? Yeah, he's deputy prime minister. He has stated, and we had heard this before, that Italy does not support Stoltenberg's idea. We'd heard that they'd said this in general, but in reply to Jens Stoltenberg, Director General of NATO, saying that the restrictions should be lifted on Western weapons being used inside Russian territory, Salvini, of course, said he does not allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory with weapon westerns. He does not support that. As Piers01 says, not surprised Salvini is a fascist. I mean, there's perhaps some truth in that. In his opinion, providing military assistance to Ukraine was the right decision. So that's something, but lifting the ban on hitting military targets in Russia is out of the question. Meanwhile, and this is where we get on to good news, Sweden allows Ukraine to strike on Russian territory with its supplied weapons, says now reports. Quote, Ukraine is subject to an unprovoked and illegal war of aggression by Russia. Ukraine has a right under international law to defend itself through acts of war directed against the territory of the opponent as long as the acts of war comply with the laws of war. Sweden supports international law and Ukraine's right to defend itself. Defense Minister Paul Jonsson has said. What is really good about this is it's Sweden saying, of course they should be allowed to strike Russia, but this isn't just us giving our kind of maybe intuitive opinion. This is ensconced within the laws of warfare. And so, therefore, there is justification. So if you were to take that to Russia and say, yes, we think they should be allowed to do this, and Russia goes, well, that's escalatory, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, you just say, well, hang on, this is agreed to by, I presume they're kind of signed up to these similar kinds of agreements, but this is international law justifies this kind of activity. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Now, this is where it gets to, well, at the moment, rumours, but these rumours seem to be gathering momentum. Unofficially, signals, again, I'm not sure the provenance of this source is a Google Translate of something coming from Max24, so take it for what it is, but we'll go on to another one in a second. Unofficially, signals are coming from the USA that the White House has already started discussing the decision to grant Ukraine permission to use American weapons on the territory of Russia, although there's no consensus yet. We've kind of already heard that already. I've reported on that the last couple of days. Antony Blinken, I think, is taking that back to the White House. People's Deputy Yehel Chernev, who is the head of the permanent delegation of Ukraine to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, stated this. So that's where the source is coming from, according to this. According to him, in informal conversations on the sidelines of Parliament of the NATO Assembly, the Americans say that in the White House, they've already started the process regarding permission for Ukraine to strike on the territory of Russia using American weapons. Then, next to reports, White House discusses allowing Ukraine to use weapons on Russian territory. Signals have come from the US that the White House has already begun discussing a decision to allow Ukraine to use US weapons on Russian territory. Really good news. I hope that they come to their senses in that regard. This is just one of the, I wouldn't say it's the last component, but this is a real obstacle at the moment. It is a real and genuine obstacle to Ukraine being able to get as much advantage as they can from the weapons that they have that Russia seem unable to answer, or, you know, so the Russians have their cruise missiles and their ballistic missiles, but the cruise missiles are generally getting shot down. The Shaheeds appear to be getting shot down. There's a lot of talk at the moment concerning Stara Konstantinivka, so the base that was targeted last night in Khmelnytsky. So if you watch my hits and losses video this morning, there was a big missile. Well, it wasn't that big actually. It was 12 cruise missiles and 2 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles, Dagger missiles, were sent pretty much at Starokonstantiniv, and then about 31 drones, some of which went to Starokonstantiniv. And Starokonstantinivka, or whatever, the air base where the F-16s will possibly be flying from, but certainly the Sukhois that send out the Storm Shadows fly from there. Okay. The Ukrainians claim they shot down all cruise missiles and all Shaheeds. there are claims from Russian media sources to say that wasn't true, and drones and missiles did get through. Certainly, the Kinzhals appear like the Ukrainians admitted they didn't shoot down the Kinzhals, but it seems like the Russians are making claims that Shaheeds and cruisers got through as well. However, there's no evidence for that, so there's no satellite imagery yet, but certainly no satellite imagery now, and no drone footage from spotted drones, because it's that far back you wouldn't have that. So where are they getting that information from? Is it coming from the feedback from those drones themselves to the MOD? Anyway, that would be interesting if things did get through, because then it would cast doubt on the claims Ukraine are making with regard to their interception rates. But that's what Russia has, is they have these cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones. Ukraine are now matching with drones by all accounts. They're claiming they are constructing those drones at the same rate that Russia are. So there's no real there's no real advantage, that Russia have. In fact, you could argue that due to the size of Russia as a country and due to the degradation of Russian air defences, that actually Ukraine have the advantage there. Ukraine have ATACMS, which are missiles that Russia do not have. They do not have that kind of equivalent, and these cluster missiles are causing havoc to the Russians. And if they can shoot them into Russian territory proper, then they can stop Kharkiv getting hammered by all sorts, by surface-to-air missiles being shot into the city, Iskander-Ms, and so on and so forth. If they can hit those air bases, it would be so significant. A lot rides on this decision. It really, really does. Now, furthermore, before we get onto the actual aid packages and whatnot, this is super important as well. This is very robust messaging here. So the Baltic states and Poland will deploy troops to Ukraine in case of Russian successes in the front, according to Spiegel, the German media source. So if the Russians achieve a strategic breakthrough in eastern Ukraine, because the West is helping with without much enthusiasm, the situation could deteriorate sharply. In such a case, the Baltic states and Poland will not wait for Russian troops to be deployed on their border. Baltic politicians warn they will introduce troops into Ukraine themselves, the article says. Of course, take that with a pinch of salt. Is this an official statement? Is this a leakage? Is this a newspaper just kind of speculating? Baltic politicians warned Germany about such a scenario during Lennart Meri's conference in Tallinn, the newspaper said. Does that mean those troops will be frontline troops or just training troops? What is going on there? But that is certainly a change in rhetoric, and it's a localized one from a particular number of states who are on the very geopolitical front lines of Russia's attack. Yep, you've got Ukraine, but after them it's Poland and the Baltics. Now, hopes grow of a G7 deal to support Ukraine with $300 billion in frozen Russian assets, says The Guardian. Foreign ministers are confident of agreement to use bank assets as security for Ukraine reconstruction loan. There have been these claims about the frozen assets profits and about $3 billion a year going to Ukraine. But the latest is, even though apparently they're going to get their first payment from that in July, the claim is that Hungary are vetoing that. So I don't know what's going on. There's mixed messages coming out of there. But Hungary can't veto. The G7 is a group of countries that seems to be fairly united behind supporting Ukraine. And although that money is largely in Belgium and it's the responsibility of the EU. If there's unity on the G7 here, then that's really good. Bill Browder was talking about this recently in a select hearing in the UK, although he's an American. He lives in the UK now. But he was saying, look, if everyone's unified behind this in the West, then this is good news, because if there's this idea that, well, the Americans do this, then it might cool down people for wanting to invest in the US because of the idea that they could freeze your assets and confiscate them and use them for whatever. But if everyone says the same, then, well, I can't invest in the US, so I'm going to invest in the EU. Oh, I can't invest in the EU because they're doing the same, so I'd go to the UK. Oh, no, they're doing the same. Australia. Oh, no, Japan. Oh, no. Oh, okay, so if everyone does that, then you've got safety in that. Anyway, here the Guardian reports hopes of a multi-country deal to use $300 billion of Russian state assets frozen in the European banking system to support Ukraine have grown after it emerged. G7 ministers were confident of overcoming technical and political obstacles at a meeting in northern Italy on Saturday. The Canadian Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said she was optimistic the G7 leaders would reach an agreement to support coalesced around a plan to use frozen Russian central bank assets as security for a $50 billion loan. So it's using that as collateral for a loan, and this is this new idea that we've heard of recently. Finance ministers from the group of 7 nations gathered in Italy and have been in discussions to thrash out a plan to present to national leaders for a final agreement at a summit in mid-June. About $300 billion belonging to the Russian central bank has been frozen by the West, largely in foreign currency, gold and government bonds. About 70% of this is held in the Belgian Central Securities Depository Euroclear, which is holding the equivalent of £162 billion. That's probably about $180 billion. The US is estimated to have about $40 to $60 billion worth of Russian assets. Really? That's a lot more than I'd heard. I'd heard it was $5 billion. So interesting, that's gone up a lot. And the UK closer to $25 billion, but no official figure has been disclosed. So that's really good news. Hopefully that can be put together and an agreement can be made. A $50 billion loan to Ukraine would be absolutely phenomenal for Ukraine to be able to just keep existing and put some into the pot for military hardware. Now, Ukraine will receive an unknown number of Boxer armoured personnel carriers from Germany, according to the Bild. The Boxer is the basis, it's a chassis for the RCH remote-controlled howitzer, the 155, or RCH 155, that the UK is now going to use to replace its AS-90 self-propelled howitzers. So that is a self-propelled gun that Germany and the UK are going to be co-producing. Well, these are the Boxers. Not an awful lot is known about this. So apparently Ukraine will receive an unknown number of GTX Boxers from Germany at an unspecified time. So a lot of vagueness here. The Ukrainian ambassador to Germany announced this in an interview with the Bild. Interestingly, he spoke of the vehicle called Aito, based on a GTX Boxer. I am not aware, says Germany to Ukraine, of any variant or mission module that is called that way. And none of the people I asked could give me an answer. If anyone has a tip, please go ahead. If Ukraine receives the APC variant, another long-term wish will be fulfilled for Ukraine. More than a year ago, Makayev, so that is Alexei Makayev, announced that negotiations were underway with the German government regarding the GTX Boxer. PS Ukraine already receives or will receive 36 RCH 155mm self-propelled howitzers based on the GTX Boxer, like I just talked about, from Germany. And no, he did not mean these. So they are due to receive those, but it's something like in 2025 and onwards. He already mentioned them before and said the Aito armoured vehicles are being delivered on top. So these are new vehicles, but details of which are pretty sketchy as it stands. But that looks a pretty decent bit of kit to me. Right, artificial intelligence will improve the fire control of Caesar guns. We've heard that Caesar have been, the manufacturer have been working a lot on artificial intelligence and how to apply it to the fire control system and the operation of the Caesar self-propelled howitzer. And apparently it will improve the fire control system produced in 2024 by at least 30%. This will reduce shell consumption by 30%. That is freaking huge, right? If you are going to say that you can use 30% more shells than you were using, given the current state of affairs for Ukraine, like that is just a really big boon for Ukraine. So good news there. Of course, it depends how many of those they use across the front line, but they are getting another 78 of them are on the way, and they are using a number at the moment. Young Ukrainian pilots trained under, and this is such a good, I think they're drawing this, yes they are, because that's a still from it. They're drawing this from the Ministry of Defence video I referenced the other day of training in the UK. It's such a good video, and in fact, I did want to show you an excerpt of it, and I'm going to do it, dagnammit. So this is an MOD video. It's really very good. Lots of little nuggets in here, and just not so much nuggets, but just understanding what these guys go through. Here's a little excerpt from training. So it follows. It looks at training for basic. So this isn't experienced Ukrainian pilots that are training on F-16s. These are pilots that are going through kind of English and basic flight training to then go to France to do some more of that, to then go eventually onto F-16s. So these are people that will be joining the F-16 sort of pilot program in Ukraine in maybe a year's time. These aren't the ones that are going to be over there in a month or two, right? But anyway, lots of fascinating stuff here.
Some showers, which may be heavy at times. So occlusion, what's an occlusion?
It's when cold and warm fronts mixes.
Yeah, good. It's when the cold front catches up with the warm front. Warm front is generally travelling a little bit slower, and they catch up. Okay, and that's what we have in occlusion. And it's quite showery, lots of showers.
The gravity of this, I cannot imagine going to another country to learn how to fly in another language and leave my family at home while they're in a war zone.
I showed them a picture of my daughter and my family, and one of the young men looked at me and said, "You are very lucky." I said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "I don't think I'll ever have that." So he was very aware of his mortality and he might die in the next few years. And at 22, that's a big ask.
Firstly, I'm a lieutenant who represented here Ukrainian forces. I'm from the northern part of Ukraine. I'm 22. Guys who elder than me a couple years, they are fighting right now close to border, and unfortunately I can't help them right now, but in the future I will be a good support for them.
They will go back, and within maybe a year or a year and a half to 2 years, they'll be on the front line fighting in the air in an F-16 over the skies of Ukraine.
I'm not going to give you everything. You need to hit that target at this time. Go figure. What time do you need to step? When do you go?
Carol. I can remember how I saw his first time. It was...
So it follows these guys as they are flying. Then it follows a bunch of people who are working on tanks. And I think, yeah, these are Challenger tanks and tank simulators. You got this guy there. We're going to come back to him in a while. Then it shows you people who are going through infantry training in urban warfare. And it talks about a translator, and then puts on, they get a Ukrainian band that plays for them. All the Ukrainians over there gather them together to give them a sense of, pride and remembering, their own sort of culture and whatnot. Really fascinating video. I want to go back to this guy. He seems to have his head switched on. We'll just dip into what he has to say here. Just really interesting chap.
The war will finish. But yeah, all of these people will came back as completely another people. When you on the battleground, and you remind or recall your, in the past, maybe half years ago or only a couple of months, you understand that you are completely another person now. Everything, not everything, but a lot of things inside you have been changed.
So just to brighten things up a bit, tell me about Vadim from before.
Vadim from before was a very cheerful and funny, easygoing, hedonist guy looking for happiness in his life, and I'm still looking for, but now I'm faced with the things. I was faced with things that decrease my faith in happiness. So, and yeah, when you sitting in a trench, you hear how 1, 2 seconds and more people dying. some of them you see how they dying, some of them dying without your sight, just you hear it in the radio, and you're trying to do shit as less as you can, because it's cold and it's windy and it's scary, because you can die while you shit, and it's not the best way to die. But and yeah, you're looking on your photos that was made like a couple of months ago, and sometimes you can even understand that it's you, like it's me. Whoa, it feels like it was in a previous life.
Really powerful.
I'll leave you alone in a second, don't worry.
What?
I'll leave you alone in a second, don't worry. I just have one last question I want to ask you. You're a young guy, 25, right?
Yep.
You're responsible for a lot of guys.
Yep.
And it must be a lot to take.
Yep.
So you're a young guy, 25, you're in charge of a bunch of guys. It must be a lot to take for you. What keeps you going, he asks, the director asks.
What's you going?
Blue and yellow colors. Is it okay?
Yeah, leave it at that, I understand.
The idea of freedom. My folk freedom.
Thank you.
And there you go. Really powerful stuff. Great insight into how these guys operate, both the trainers and the trainees. Well worth looking at. Really good video. Right. So anyway, where was I? So first batch of 10 future Ukrainian F-16 pilots to receive NATO standard training from the ground up have graduated in elementary flying training with the RAF and are now conducting fast jet training with the French Air Force. So the French to take over and take them to France, and they do the next step in France. And then this is part of the OP Interstorm mission, and it will augment the experienced Ukrainian Air Force combat veterans currently undergoing Danish and Dutch F-16 training. So they're getting training in Denmark, Danish and Dutch training. I think they're getting training in Denmark and also Romania from those teams. These guys will likely return to Ukraine next year, and the experienced ones that we talked about before probably in a month or two. So here we have Ukraine, the idea that Ukraine should have received F-16 aircraft 2 years ago. So a US general says this, quote, Ukraine should have received F-16s 2 years ago, but it's in the past. Ukraine needs to prepare to use these aircraft in a number it is receiving now, said Lieutenant General David Deptula of the US Air Force Reserve. The American general believes that F-16s will strengthen the Ukrainian Air Force, but their number matters. According to Deptula, the more F-16s Ukraine can get, the stronger the Ukrainians will be in the future. Absolutely, 100%. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Right. I have to do a correction on what I said yesterday. I was being a bit thick. So I was talking about the GBU-39 small diameter bomb, and this is a bomb that we weren't aware Ukraine were getting until maybe November. The hints coming through, and now it appears that they're getting these and they're having 90% strike success rates. These are very good, and I said they don't have glide kits on, and they do have glide kits. In fact, they look a bit like that, which is very glidey and kitty. And many of you pointed this out to me and said, look, even in the picture, they've got them underneath. So you need to go to Specsavers. And so I do need to go to Specsavers, evidently, or just clean these bloody glasses. And sorry about that. So they do. And that's why they do have a pretty decent range. So I was talking about how the Ukrainian pilots would have to get a lot closer to the front lines to release these, but of course, not so much. Operational range, 60 nautical miles, so 69 miles, 111 kilometers when airdropped. But of course, that's dependent on being able to drop them really high up, and that won't be the case. 150 kilometers when launched as part of the GLSDB. So GLSDB uses these to launch them from the multiple launch rocket system, but adapts them to be able to be shot from those, but it's basically the same bomb. And these, when they're just dropped, so I always thought it was full-on dumb munitions that were adapted for the GLSDB. But these are basically not proper dumb munitions. They are precision guided with a kit on them. So there you go. Sorry about that. Okay, UK and its allies are secretly arming Ukraine with Russian and Soviet weapons, according to the Times, to help replenish Ukrainian stockpiles. Part of Britain's bilateral aid was used to buy Russian weapons from around the world. We kind of knew this, but more details are coming out. I was listening to an interview some time ago on Ukraine, the latest podcast from the Daily Telegraph, that talks about somebody saying that, we were going around the world trying to hoover up all these Soviet era munitions from these different countries, but actually as we were doing that, we were recognizing that the Russians were trying to do that as well. So it's a bit of a bidding war. It was all a bit clandestine, but that's interesting because it showed that the Russians were in desperate need of munitions themselves, and of course the West is probably in a better position, at least in financial terms, to outbid the Russians, given the precarious economic situation the Russians are in. But nonetheless, I suppose it's who's willing to splash more cash, even if it can hurt you more in the long run. I'm guessing it's the West, but maybe not. This work was kept completely secret, partly because of where Britain was getting it from and who was supplying it. So there's also this idea that some of the countries didn't want it to be known that they were supplying weaponry to Ukraine, munitions to Ukraine. So perhaps these are countries like maybe India, who are part of BRICS and sort of nominally supportive of Russia, actually supplying stuff to Britain on the black market, if you like, or on the sly. Don't tell anyone, but here's a bunch of stuff. Thank you. We'll take the money for that, because the likelihood of us using that, we're kind of upgrading. We're starting to look west, actually, with our weaponry, etc., etc., etc. Right. Bavarian Minister of the Interior calls for no assistance to Ukrainian male citizens of military age. So Joachim Herrmann believes that Germany cannot support Ukraine and at the same time close its eyes to the fact that some citizens, quote, do not fulfill their duty to defend their country without good reason. The politician raised the issue in the context of a discussion about Berlin's measures to finance the stay of displaced persons. So there is some pushback in Germany to say, why are we giving these guys welfare when Ukraine really needs them to fight the war? They are draft evaders. We shouldn't be on the one hand giving money and weaponry to Ukraine, and also on the other hand paying these people to not fight to effectively be able to stay in Germany and not fight in the war to support their own country. Now, I know this is a very sticky subject. I know Bertold in the threads will be shouting about this or whatnot, but the idea is that not everyone agrees in Germany, with, I guess, the refugee status perhaps of these people. There's obviously EU regulations, international legal regulations about whether draft evaders are entitled to X, Y, and Z, or whether they are themselves. I mean, I've argued this before. There's a difference between simple draft evaders from self-preservation to conscientious objectors who object to the war just in general philosophical, political, religious reasons, or whatever it might be. Those are two separate categories, and one may be entitled to refugee status and the other not necessarily. But anyway, interesting that there's a bit of discussion going on in Germany with regard to that. Ukraine has already released 350 prisoners to participate in the war. More than 4,000 more are on the way. This was stated by the Minister of Justice of Ukraine, Denis Malyuska. Under the new law, they will take part in hostilities in exchange for the possibility of parole. So I believe that it's quite strict. It's not like the convicts that were sent to the front line on the Russian side. You had murderers and rapists and all this kind of people who were just promised freedom with 6 months of fighting, and then of course that came and bit them on the arse, because after 6 months they lost a load of troops, and then they had to free these kind of the worst of their prison system back into society, and they've changed the rules since then. But as far as I understand it, in the Ukrainian rule is you had to be within 3 years of the end of your sentence, I believe, and then you can't be, multiple murderer. You can't, but actually corruption. You can't be done for corruption and go and sign up. So that's interesting, and a load of other things. But they are getting people, and that's really good. So 4,000 on the way, 4,000 more on the way, 350 already gone, and there were claims of even greater numbers, but I don't know whether that is accurate going forward or not. I heard of 10 to 20,000 eventually, but who knows? These Russian parents in Moscow spent a day pleading on social networks that the military scooped up their kids on the streets to send them to Ukraine, desperately following conscription buses around the city. So these are parents not happy. Lots of videos seeing their giving evidence here, video evidence, the time and date, and looking at vehicles around their cities, collecting up Russian people for forced conscription. And I said this morning in my other video that there's a big difference between Ukrainians doing this between Ukrainians doing this and Russians doing this. Russia's do be quiet. Shut up. No offense. Don't shut up in real life, but just now, thanks. Goodness, I'm gonna have to get rid of that. Oh no, it's quiet. Okay, so difference being that these guys are invading another country. Russia's invading another country, scooping up people and forcing them to fight in a war that is illegal, wrong, morally wrong, aggressive and terrible, and giving them poor training, poor conditions, etc., etc. And Ukraine saying, look, if we don't have soldiers, our country will cease to exist. Russia won't cease to exist if they don't invade Ukraine, right? So, but Ukraine will cease to exist if it doesn't defend itself. And so those are completely two different situations where, like, okay, if we've got a mobilization rule enacted to mobilize to defend ourselves, and you are evading that, then we need to collect you up if you are draft evading, because that is actually breaking the law of the land, so on and so forth. I know, there are lots of moral arguments to do with that, etc., but that's the kind of landscape. Okay, Russia is producing artillery shells around 3 times faster than Ukraine's Western allies, and for about a quarter of the cost, according to an analyst shared with Sky News. Now, this is a bit of a problem, right? So Kiev Independent's going with this. Russian shell production 3 times greater than that of Ukraine's allies. Using publicly available data, consulting firm Bain & Company claims that Russian factories can produce or refurbish 4.5 million 152 mil shells for $1,000 per round this year. This is a bit dodgy, okay? Let's first go to what Sky News say. So Russia's producing artillery shells around 3 times faster than Ukraine's Western allies, and for about a quarter of the cost. And the key point is here: as a result, Ukrainian soldiers on the front line say that for every 1 round they fire against Russian positions, the invading troops are launching around 5 shells back. 5-to-1 usage at the moment equates to about 10,000 a day that the Russians are using, 2,000 a day that the Ukrainians are using, although I don't know if that's still the case with the new ammunition coming in. But of course, that's not at all what they were firing at the peak of the war, where they're firing anywhere, the Russians between 40 and 60,000, the Russians and the Ukrainians about 7,000. So that was about maybe a 9-to-1 ratio. So actually the ratio has improved. And that's not the manufacturing rate. So it goes on to say the research on artillery rounds by Bain & Company, which drew on publicly available data, found that Russian factories were forecast to manufacture or refurbish around 4.5 million artillery shells this year, compared to the combined production of about 1.3 million rounds across the European nations and the US. This is a massive, massive issue, not in what they say, as in the conclusions of what they say here, but actually the actual substance of what they say is incorrect. Right? They are smashing together lots of different things here. On cost, it said the average production cost per 155mm shell, the type produced by NATO countries, was around $4,000 per unit, although it varied significantly between countries. This is compared with the reported Russian production cost of around $1,000 per 152mm shell that the Russian armed forces use. Artillery is one of the main munition shortfalls faced by Ukraine. So the idea is that the Ukrainians are making 1.3 million rounds, and that Russia is making 4.5 million shells. And they are, it appears here, like for like. They're comparing 4.5 to 1.3 million. But they're not. This appears to be really bad journalism. And this makes someone like Andrew Perpetua really freaking angry. Like, he is super angry, because this is something he's talked about a lot of times before. So this is what he says. I have an idea, says Andrew. Every time someone uses a total number of Russian mortar plus 122mm plus 152mm ammo production and compares that to 155mm ammo production, they have to donate quarter of their salary to the Czech ammo purchase. Does that seem fair? So comparing 152 to 155, 122 to 105, and mortars to mortars, if you want to do that, fine. If not, STFU, shut the frick up and don't say anything at all. So what this article appears to be doing, and this is not the first time either, this is happening consistently when it's being reported, is they're taking 152mm rounds. I think they're taking 2 artillery artillery caliber rounds and mortars, smashing that all together and comparing that to 155mm rounds, and then saying this is like for like. This is basically 152 compared to 155. Actually, 4.5 million is artillery and mortars and several different calibers of artillery, and you're comparing it to just 155mm rounds. It's just absolutely is comparing apples to bricks there, and it is not useful at all. So he says, also comparing the price of a mortar shell to 155mm shell, are you stupid? I bought 4 cups of coffee and you only bought 1 cow. And I paid only $20 while you stupidly paid $2,000. Therefore, I'm winning. I can continue buying coffee for 100th of the price that you buy your cows. You will never have as many cows as I have cups of coffee. Surrender is over for you. He is frustrated there because this is poor journalism. So don't be swayed by this. The production of 155mm shells is up. Then you've got all the different calibers of NATO size shells, and you've got all the mortar rounds that are being produced. You need to throw them all together or compare each type of, like 155 to 152mm, and then others, mortars to mortars. Don't just do this. This is really disingenuous stuff from that Sky News reporter. Right, Iranian drone has crashed in Kursk. What's interesting about this is it's an Iranian Mohajer 6 drone that looks a bit like an aeroplane. In fact, many Russians started claiming that this was a Ukrainian drone, yada, yada, yada. Actually, no, it's an Iranian drone. We seem to have gone past this idea that because the Iranians are kind of like denied that this was happening, but we got to this point where we all accept that the Iranians are providing drones. What are we doing about this? What about sanctions? What about the UN? Here's another Iranian drone that's just fallen out of the sky in Russia, and Russia goes, ain't seen nothing. Sorry about that. Nothing to see here. Move along. Okay, nothing to see here. And it's like the North Korean munitions used. It's breaking sanctions. Nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. You'll forget about it soon. Gee whiz. Right. A really interesting post from a Russian volunteer, Anastasia Kashavarova, that she shared, a bit like Evil Gherkin, very anti what's going on at the moment, but very pro-Russian. So it's like, guys, we need to sort it out type thing. Let's look at some of these because I think it is pretty important. I won't read the first one, it's his second one. We are hushing up the problems again, but they exist, and the bravado about the capture of Kharkiv, when enemy forces are already accumulating there, can only be demonstrated by the crazy ones for those who do not know how to count. Our artillery is suffering, both the equipment itself and the untrained guys. So what? So they don't have good equipment, and their crew are untrained, not very well trained. So what? Our artillerymen are sent to assault, and then they're also sent in as infantrymen. The equipment is playing up. I won't say anything about Korean shells, and the fact that's North Korean shells, and the fact that certain shells are supplied, but the launch system for them is completely different. So how do we fire? Launch them by hand? So they're not even compatible with what they're firing, supposed to be firing them with. Drones, there's a catastrophic shortage of them. This is really interesting because you hear different claims, but she's saying we've got a catastrophic shortage of drones. Enemy electronic warfare jams many of the drones that are available. Drone manufacturers are already fighting with each other. Sometimes it seems that we are working not as so much for the front, but for the personal interests and fame. This is back at home. Electronic warfare, Sanya Bulat, in many places they no longer work. It's not a guarantee that expensive electronic warfare will work. We need to adjust it. There are few specialists, or our electronic warfare jams everything, both our own and someone else's, the enemy's. Either these are Chinese electronic warfare or anti-drone guns, which pseudo-inventors pass off as their product. Real electronic warfare of high quality is not yet in mass production. Only enthusiasts make it on their knees. And at this time, Ukrainians are receiving a large number of drones. They are slowly receiving missile launches, and on our TV they say, ha ha, hobos, you have nothing. You are begging for everything. I want to ask our people, what do we have? You don't see that they are methodically knocking out our equipment. Ships, refineries, and fuel and lubricants warehouses in the front line and frontline zones. It becomes more difficult to practice at training grounds. For example, HIMARS report to the LPR. It's difficult to the training grounds there now, and the training process has gotten worse. Ammo warehouses. Waiters are given to outpoints. I don't understand what that is. To win, we must become better. Resources, ideology, social services. All this should be directed towards victory. Propaganda works to the detriment when it focuses on the problems of the enemy. which we also have, you cannot relax and believe in peace. In other words, stop listening to what our propagandists are telling us on TV back at home. They are absolutely hitting, as it says, to oil refineries, fuel depots, gas stations, drones, missiles. It's saying that our seems to go unnoticed. In the LPR, after a series of attacks, a problem arose with fuel and lubricants. The fighters purchased fuel at civilian gas stations at their own expense. In the frontline areas, there are explosions every week at gas stations, refineries, and so on. There's all this stuff going on that maybe we're all not aware of that is leading to someone here who's on the front lines volunteering, saying, what the hell is going on? We are having a mass asymmetry here. We're struggling in this way and struggling in that way. And actually, the Ukrainians have the advantage there. But of course, that doesn't always translate to what the mainstream media is reporting. And then the final thing here, this is about BMPs. So these are infantry fighting vehicles. BMP-3 is the most recent one. Here is Richard Vereka using war spotting loss statistics, saying this is the percentage of BMPs, types of BMP-3s. So there are different variants of BMP-3s. So the yellow one is what was made, is a general BMP-3. And then you've got a blue one that was made from 2020 onwards, and then that got taken over by the grey one made from 2022 onwards. So the grey one is taking up the largest percentage of losses of BMP-3s. And if you've only started making them since 2022, what does that tell you about the BMP-3s that are being lost? It means that you're losing all the ones you had before. In fact, there was the satellite analysis of BMP-3s, and there are literally no BMP-3s left in storage. So the most recent type of infantry fighting vehicle, there are none left in storage, and they're cycling through those which have been made since 2022. That, I think, is really significant. As a percentage of the total, BMP-3s have got a fairly consistent loss amount. There is a slight downtick, and he says that that's likely an anomaly and nothing serious. But I think it could be that if you don't have the storage of these, and you're losing them. You're losing those which you're making, then your production of BMP-3s will affect your percentage of those that are being lost. And I think that downtick could be significant there. Anyway, interesting that is happening. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care and speak to you soon.